Is a Ukrainian retreat from Bakhmut imminent? And have the Ukrainian armed forces called their shot on the spring offensive? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's February 27th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. First, when we look at the control map, you guys can see one of the most significant changes is this salient here as Russian forces are advancing along this small road here, probably in an effort to put pressure on this withdrawal route from Bakhmut. I think this is one of the really only changes to the front line, and it's not clear that this is sustainable or fully accurate. This is pretty rare for Russia for us to see this map put a long, thin finger of control. Usually control is in these areas here, but you can see it's surrounded on one side by a water formation and on the other side by open terrain. So it would be hard for either side to really meaningfully expose themselves and occupy this turf here. But I think it's significant because you can see just how close Russian forces are to Bakhmut on three sides now. And if you are the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut, you need to be doing a controlled withdrawal. We've seen this in Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and this is probably the right tactical call or strategic call in this situation. Preserve your combat power. Again, we've seen on the Patreon some of the GoPro footage from soldiers fighting in Bakhmut. You can see there's nothing left. The city has been basically entirely destroyed. There is no tactical, or there's no operational significance or strategic significance to Bakhmut, if there ever was in the first place. So what you have instead, right, you're going to start to see a withdrawal. There's rumors that some units have already been pulled out towards Chasiv Yar or Avansky, and they're likely going to maintain these two corridors as open as long as possible. They're probably going to withdraw from Bakhmut in this order. From east to west. That's at least what I would do. And then you'll see probably Russia try to close the front line off around Chasiv Yar. Ukraine's had a long time to prepare for this, so it's not really that significant. They should have a good defensive line and defensive plan prepared. When we look to the north somewhat, you can see that crucially there hasn't been any changes really at all along this other axis where Russian forces are really trying to make gains, particularly along the Crimea-Lyman axis. Now, let's talk a little bit about the political situation. First off, you have Zelensky has apparently fired a major senior military commander. This is one of the commanders that worked in the Donbas. He's the commander of the Joint Forces operation. And it's sort of interesting. It's not clear. There's no reason given. It could be seen as making a head roll. Someone needs to get fired for the fall of Bakhmut because politically it's so uncomfortable for Zelensky to acknowledge that defending Bakhmut no longer became cost effective. And while tactically the right decision, it's hard to explain that to the voting public. And so a commander who lost Bakhmut needs to be fired as punishment. And what often happens in at least the Second World War, getting fired as a tactical commander was extremely common. Multiple generals, oftentimes ones that held even very, very high ranks by the end of the war, would routinely be fired from operations for a variety of reasons, oftentimes because of the president or their higher commanders' dissatisfaction with their conduct or treatment or how they fought that particular war, or simply because they had other strengths. I can't think of the name right now, but I believe there was a one commander who was fired after a battle in Italy, but then went on to become the director of something like all logistics across the entire war effort, which is a more prestigious command and one that probably reflected his personal strengths. He was probably someone who you wanted to running your logistics system. So take all these firings with a big grain of salt. That's what I would say. If there was some sort of corruption allegation, which we've seen in the past, but Ukraine has generally acknowledged publicly that a senior officials have been corrupt, including some very senior officials at times. When we look at the other news, there's some few more interesting tidbits that have come out recently. And first is that the Ukrainian armed forces have said that they are, let's see if we can, they have acknowledged that they are going to be attempting, here we go. Deputy head of Ukrainian Military Intelligence Directorate said the Ukrainian forces will be ready for a counteroffensive this upcoming spring, and that one of Ukraine's strategic goals will be to drive a wedge into the Russian front in southern Ukraine between Crimea and the Russian mainland. So that is interesting because basically the only way to do that, he's talking about slicing somewhere in here. And this is exactly what we talked about. Really cutting this wedge in the peninsula. So fascinating. Now, as you guys might know, Ukraine had a huge disinformation effort around their Kherson offensive. They talked about the Kherson offensive, and then the offensive came from Kharkiv. So Russia probably is going to take the bait a second time. We shouldn't either. Honestly, as I've talked about, I really suspect that as Ukraine begins to withdraw from Bakhmut, that's going to pin these Russian forces in place as they're already pinned here. And that it would be the time to start your offensive operations in a third location, wherever that might be. So that's anyway how I would approach it, and a good way for us to think about it. But that's all I had for you for today. As always, guys, thank you so much. Thanks to my supporters on Patreon. I know I still have to update my Patreon screen. I swear I will do it today. Been real busy lately. But thanks to all of our Colonel tier patrons, our Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. If you want to join and get access to the exclusive combat footage breakdowns, the kind that YouTube won't let me show you, they are on the Patreon, in the link, in the description. I'll see you guys in the next one.